History tells us that Lady Genevieve Sinclair was the tragic, blind beauty of 1884, a fragile flower married off to the ruthless Duke of Westcliff. But history is written by liars. The truth, Genevieve wasn't blind. She was the best actress in London, hiding in plain sight to escape a father who viewed her as cattle. She fooled doctors. She fooled society. She fooled everyone, except him. Duke Alistair Stirling didn't just want a wife, he wanted a spy. And he knew from the moment she poured his tea without spilling a drop that she was a fraud. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the dangerous, true story of how a 3-year lie turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The year was 1884, and the air in the Sinclair manor smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. To the outside world, Baron Silas Sinclair was a respected member of the peerage, a man of standing who had tragically lost his wife and was now burdened with a disabled daughter. To those inside the walls of Blackwood Manor, specifically to 20-year-old Genevieve, he was a monster drowning in gambling debts owed to the most dangerous men in London's East End. Genevieve sat by the window in the drawing room, her eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance, unfocused, glassy, staring at nothing. She didn't blink when the heavy velvet curtains fluttered, nor did she flinch when her father slammed his fist onto the mahogany table a few feet away. "She's useless to me like this," Silas roared, the scent of brandy rolling off him in waves. 3 years, Dr. Humphreys. 3 years, and she still gropes about like a newborn kitten. Lord Pembroke withdrew his offer this morning. He wants a wife who can host dinners, not one who knocks over the wine. Dr. Humphreys, a man whose medical license was as shaky as his hands side. The horse riding accident caused severe trauma to the occipital lobe, Baron. As I have stated, the blindness is likely permanent. You cannot sell a horse with a broken leg, and you cannot easily marry off a blind girl to a high bidder. Genevieve's hands were folded demurely in her lap. Under the lace of her gloves, her knuckles were white. She kept her breathing shallow. "Don't look at him," she chanted internally. "Don't look at the vase he's about to throw. Stare at the void." She saw it all, of course. Through the haze of her eyelashes, she saw the sweat on her father's balding head. She saw the greed in the doctor's eyes as he pocketed a bribe. For 3 years, Genevieve had lived in a self-imposed prison of darkness. It was the only shield she had. If she were whole, she would have been sold off to Lord Pembroke, a man known for beating his horses and his mistresses years ago. But broken things were harder to sell. "Then lower the price," Silas spat. "I don't care if it's a duke or a dustman. Find someone who wants a pretty ornament. I need £20,000 by the end of the month, or the creditors take the estate." Genevieve's heart hammered against her ribs. She had bought herself time, but time was running out. The change in her fate arrived 3 days later in a black carriage bearing the crest of a wolf devouring a serpent. The Duke of Westcliff, Alistair Stirling. The name alone was enough to silence a ballroom. He was a war hero from the Afghan campaigns, a man who had returned to England with a limp, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and a reputation for icy ruthlessness. Rumors swirled that he had killed a man in a duel over a matter of honor regarding the scandalous Kensington affair, though no charges were ever pressed. He was rich beyond measure, powerful and utterly terrifying. And he was in her drawing room. Genevieve sat in her usual chair, her cane resting against her knee. She heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of his boots, the slight drag of his left leg. He didn't smell like brandy and stale smoke like her father. He smelled of rain leather and something sharp like gunpowder. "This is her." The voice was deep, a baritone that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "Yes, Your Grace." Her father simpered, his tone dripping with desperate obsequiousness. "Lady Genevieve, a beauty as you can see. Quiet, pious, tragedy struck 3 years ago, but she manages." "Leave us," the Duke commanded. "Your Grace, surely." "I said leave us." The door clicked shut. Genevieve felt the weight of his gaze. It was heavy, physical. Most people ignored the blind, treating them as furniture. But Alistair Sterling was studying her. She could feel him circling her chair. "Look at me," he said. Genevieve slowly turned her head toward the sound of his voice, keeping her eyes vacant, fixed just past his left ear. "My lord," she whispered, "they say you were a wild thing before the accident, that you rode stallions and read philosophy." He leaned down. She could feel the heat radiating from him. "Now you sit here like a porcelain doll." "God's will is mysterious, Your Grace." "Is it?" He moved suddenly. A gloved hand shot out, stopping just an inch from her face. A reflex test. It took every ounce of willpower honed over 1,000 days of fear not to blink. She didn't flinch. She didn't draw back. She let her eyes remain dead, staring through his hand as if it were made of glass. Alistair paused. He lowered his hand. "Good," he murmured, though the word sounded suspicious. "I require a wife, Lady Genevieve. Not for love. I have no use for such sentiment. I need a duchess to manage my household at Stirling Hall and to produce an heir. In return, I will pay your father's debts and ensure you are never mistreated. But I value privacy above all else. A blind wife sees no secrets, hears only what she is told." Genevieve kept her face blank, but inside her mind was racing. He wants a victim. He wants someone helpless. "Do you accept?" he asked. She hesitated. If she said no, her father would sell her to Pembroke eventually. Pembroke was a brute. This Duke was cold, yes, perhaps dangerous, but he was offering a business transaction. And if he thought she was blind, she could hide from him too. "I accept, Your Grace," she said softly. "Excellent." He straightened up. "We leave for Stirling Hall in the morning. Pack light, Genevieve. I will provide everything you need." As he turned to leave, he stopped at the door. "Oh, and Genevieve." "Yes, Your Grace. There is a step down immediately outside this door. Be careful you don't trip." There was no step. The floor was perfectly level. It was a trap. Genevieve smiled famously sadly. "Thank you for the warning, Your Grace. I shall rely on my maid to guide me." She heard a low hum of approval, or was it amusement? The door closed. Genevieve let out a breath that sounded like a sob. She had survived the interview, but she had the distinct, terrifying sensation that she had just walked out of a cage and into a lion's den. Stirling Hall was not a home. It was a fortress. Located on the craggy cliffs of Cornwall, the estate was battered by constant winds and salt spray. The architecture was Gothic, filled with shadowing corridors, gargoyles, and drafty rooms that seemed to whisper when the wind howled. The journey had been grueling. For 2 days in the carriage, Genevieve had maintained her act perfectly. She allowed Alistair to help her in and out, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. She ate with agonizing slowness, feeling for her utensils. She noticed that Alistair rarely spoke, but he watched her, constantly. He read documents, she caught glimpses of maps and lists of names like Covington and Blackwell, but the moment she shifted, he would look up. Upon arrival, she was introduced to the staff. Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper, was a stern woman with a voice like grating metal. "Blind as a bat, is she?" Mrs. Higgins muttered to a maid, thinking Genevieve couldn't hear. Just what the master needs. Another ghost in the hall. Genevieve was given the East Wing suite. It was lavish, filled with silks and imported rugs, but isolated. "I have arranged for a companion for you," Alistair told her that first evening at dinner. They sat at a table long enough to seat 30. He was at one end. She was miles away at the other. "Her name is Clara. She will be your eyes." "That is kind of you, Alistair," she said, testing his first name. "It is practical," he corrected. "I'm often away on business. I do not want you falling down the stairs." The first 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception. Genevieve learned the layout of the room by counting steps out loud whenever Clara was nearby, while actually memorizing the visual layout when she was alone. She discovered that Stirling Hall was a place of secrets. At night, men arrived in dark cloaks. Couriers came and went at odd hours. One rainy Tuesday, Genevieve found herself alone in the library. She had dismissed Clara, claiming a headache and a need for quiet prayer. The library was massive, a 2-story cavern of books. Genevieve loved books. It had been the hardest part of her 3-year lie, starving her mind. She waited 10 minutes. Silence. The house was still. She opened her eyes fully, the strain of keeping them unfocused fading. She scanned the room, drinking in the colors of the spines, crimson leather, navy cloth, gold leaf. It was intoxicating. She stood up, leaving her cane by the chair, and walked silently toward the desk where Alistair did his work. She didn't want to pry, but she needed to know who she had married. She glanced at the papers strewn across the mahogany surface. It was a letter, unfinished. The handwriting was sharp and jagged. To Lord Archibald, regarding the shipment of rifles to the northern border. The deception holds. The Crown suspects nothing. Rifles, the northern border. Was he a traitor, a smuggler? Her heart rate spiked. She reached out to turn the page over. Creak. The sound of a floorboard settling in the hallway. Genevieve threw herself back toward her chair. She grabbed her cane, squeezed her eyes shut, and assumed her frozen posture just as the heavy oak doors swung open. "Genevieve?" It was Alistair. His voice was closer than she expected. He hadn't walked in. He had stalked in. "I am here, Your Grace," she said, keeping her voice steady, though her pulse was thundering in her ears. I lost my way to the door. I was just waiting for Clara." Silence. She heard him walk into the room. He didn't stop at the door. He walked past her toward the desk. She heard the rustle of papers. "You are sitting quite far from the door," Alistair said, "and yet you are facing the desk perfectly." "I followed the draft from the window," she lied smoothly. "I felt the cold air." "The window is closed," Alistair said. Panic flared hot and bright. "Is it—" Genevieve tilted her head. "Then perhaps it was a draft from the chimney. This house is very airy." Alistair hummed. He walked toward her. He stopped directly in front of her. "You have no companion. You are alone." "I prefer solitude sometimes. Darkness is a quiet friend." "You dropped this." He held something out. She didn't move. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know where it was. "What is it?" she asked, staring blindly ahead. Your handkerchief. It is on the floor by your left foot." She paused. If she reached down and picked it up immediately, she would reveal she knew exactly where it was. If she groped for it, she risked looking foolish, but she would be safe. She bent down, sweeping her hand across the rug in wide, searching arcs. She patted the floor to her right, then in front. Finally, her fingers brushed the silk of the handkerchief near her left foot. She picked it up. "Thank you." "Interesting," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You found that eventually. But when you stood up to greet me, you looked directly into my eyes. Most blind people look at mouths or chins. You looked at my pupils. I look toward the sound of the voice, your grace. Do you—" Suddenly he grabbed her chin. His grip was firm, but not painful. He tilted her face up. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his grey eyes. She could see the scar cutting through his eyebrow. He was devastatingly handsome and terrifyingly sharp. "You are a terrible liar, Genevieve," he whispered. She froze. He knows. But then he released her. "But you are a magnificent actress. Keep your secrets for now. But know this, in this house the walls have eyes. If you are playing a game, ensure you win. Because the penalty for betrayal in my world is not debt or poverty. It is death." He turned and walked away. "Dinner is at 7. Wear the red dress. I want to see if you can find it in the wardrobe without help." The door slammed. Genevieve slumped back into the chair, trembling. He knew, or at least he strongly suspected. But he hadn't exposed her. Why? She looked at the desk where the letter about the rifles lay. The deception holds. He was hiding something too. Something massive. And he was keeping her around because he wanted to see what she was hiding. The game had officially begun. And for the first time in 3 years, Genevieve realized she might not be the hunter or the prey. She was the bait. The following months at Stirling Hall were not a marriage. They were a siege. To the outside world, the Duke and Duchess of Westcliff were an eccentric pair. The servants whispered about the Duke's icy demeanor and the Duchess's tragic frailty. But inside the stone walls, a silent, high-stakes chess match was being played. Alistair tested her every single day. One morning, Genevieve walked into the breakfast parlour to find the heavy oak chairs completely rearranged. The path she had memorized, 10 steps from the door, turn left 3 steps to the table, was now blocked by a heavy sideboard that had been moved overnight. She paused in the doorway. Through her eyelashes, she saw Alistair sitting at the far end of the room, sipping his coffee, a newspaper raised high to obscure his face. He was watching her over the rim. Panic fluttered in her chest. If she walked her usual path, she would slam her shins into the mahogany sideboard. If she navigated around it perfectly, she would reveal her sight. Genevieve tightened her grip on her cane. She took a deep breath and began to walk, counting her steps aloud. 1, 2, 3. She walked straight toward the sideboard. She didn't slow down. She forced her body to remain loose, preparing for the impact. Commit, she told herself. You have to commit. Thud. Her shin collided hard with the wood. She cried out, stumbling forward, her cane clattering to the floor. She caught herself on the edge of the sideboard, knocking over a crystal vase that shattered with a violence that echoed through the room. Genevieve. Alistair was there in a second. He hadn't expected her to actually hit it. He thought she would swerve. He grabbed her arm to steady her, his grip firm. Are you hurt? He demanded, his voice devoid of its usual mockery. Genevieve squeezed her eyes shut, tears of genuine pain pricking at the corners. I don't understand, she gasped, clutching her leg. The table. It wasn't here yesterday. I counted the steps. I counted. Alistair looked at the misplaced furniture, then back at her. He saw the bruising already forming on her shin through the torn stocking. He saw the shattered glass. Guilt. For the first time, she saw a flicker of genuine guilt in his eyes. I had the servants move the furniture for cleaning. He lied smoothly, though his jaw was tight. I forgot to warn you. That was careless of me. It is quite all right, Your Grace, she whispered, trembling. I'm just clumsy. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her to the chaise lounge. As he shouted for Mrs. Higgins to bring ice, Genevieve allowed herself a tiny internal smile. Round 1 to the Duchess. But the game wasn't just about defense. Genevieve needed to know who her husband really was. The Rifles letter had haunted her. Weeks later, opportunity struck. Alistair left for London on urgent business, leaving his study locked. But Genevieve had grown up in a house of gamblers and debtors. She knew how to pick a simple lock with a hairpin. At midnight, she slipped into his study. She didn't need a candle. Moonlight flooded the room. She went straight to the hidden compartment in his desk. She had noticed him glancing at weeks prior, a slight discoloration in the wood paneling. She pried it open. Inside wasn't gold or illicit love letters. It was a dossier. The cover was stamped with the seal of the British Secret Intelligence Bureau. She opened it and read rapidly. Target, the Circle of Crows, an anarchist group smuggling explosives into Parliament. Lead agent Alistair Sterling, codename Wolf. Objective infiltrate and dismantle. Genevieve froze. He wasn't a traitor selling rifles. He was the Crown's most dangerous weapon hunting domestic terrorists. The traitors he met at night were informants. Her husband was a spy. And then she found a paper with her name on it. Subject, Lady Genevieve. Status monitor. Father's debts paid. Potential leverage against Baron Sinclair if he is connected to the circle. Note. Subject exhibits inconsistencies in disability. Verify. He had bought her not just as a wife, but as a potential lead in an investigation. He suspected her father was involved with the anarchists, and he was watching her to see if she was a courier. She put the papers back exactly as she found them. When Alistair returned 2 days later, he looked exhausted. He sat by the fire, nursing a whiskey. Genevieve walked in, sensing his mood. You smell of gunpowder and London rain, she said softly, sitting opposite him. And you smell of lavender and secrets, he replied, not looking up. I had a dream while you were away, she said, testing the waters. I dreamt of wolves hunting crows. The wolves were frightening, but they were protecting the sheep. Alistair's hand froze on his glass. He looked at her, really looked at her. And what did the sheep do? The sheep pretended to be asleep, Genevieve said, turning her unseeing eyes toward the fire. Because if the wolf knew the sheep was watching, he might bite. A thick silence stretched between them. It was a communication purely in code. She was telling him, I know what you are, and I am not your enemy. Alistair stood up and walked over to her. He didn't touch her. He leaned down, his mouth close to her ear. Sheep who see too much tend to get slaughtered by the crows, Genevieve. Sleep is safer. I have slept for 3 years. Alistair, she whispered, using his name boldly. I am waking up. For a moment, the air crackled with a strange, dangerous electricity. It wasn't quite romance, but it was an intense, intellectual intimacy. They were 2 liars living in the same house, finally acknowledging that they were both playing a game. "Then wake up carefully," he murmured, "because the ball is next week, and the crows will be there." The invitation was to the winter gala at the estate of Lord Blackwood, one of the most powerful men in the House of Lords. It was the social event of the season, a swirling vortex of silk diamonds and political intrigue. Alistair had insisted she come. "I need you there," he had said, cryptic as always. "A blind wife is a perfect shield. No one approaches a man guiding an invalid to talk business." Genevieve wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, fitted to perfection. Around her neck hung the sterling sapphires, heavy and cold. She held Alistair's arm as they entered the ballroom, her cane tapping a soft rhythm on the marble floor. The room was a kaleidoscope of color she wasn't supposed to see. Chandeliers dripped with crystal. Women in pastels gossiped behind fans. Men in stiff collars eyed Alistair with a mixture of fear and respect. "Steady," Alistair murmured. "Lord Pembroke is at 3:00. Genevieve stiffened. Pembroke. The man she had pretended to be blind to escape. "Well, well," a greasy voice boomed. "If it isn't the sterling wolf and his broken doll." Genevieve kept her eyes fixed on the middle distance, though she could see Pembroke's red, blotchy face and the wine stain on his lapel. "Lord Pembroke," Alistair said, his voice dropping 10 degrees, "I suggest you step aside." "A shame, really," Pembroke sneered, stepping closer to Genevieve. "She was such a spirited filly before she fell. Tell me, Genevieve, do you miss the sunlight? Or is it all just one long night for you?" He reached out to touch her face. It was a violation, a test, and an insult all in one. Before his finger could graze her skin, Alistair's hand shot out, catching Pembroke's wrist in a bone-crushing grip. "Touch my wife again," Alistair whispered loud enough for the nearby circle to hear, "and you will lose the hand." He shoved Pembroke back. The crowd parted. Genevieve felt a flutter of warmth in her chest. He was defending her. Not his asset. Her. But the night was not about petty rivalries. It was about the mission. An hour later, Alistair left her seated in a quiet alcove near the terrace doors. "Stay here," he ordered. "I must speak with the Home Secretary. Do not move." Genevieve sat obediently, her cane in hand. But as soon as he disappeared into the crowd, she scanned the room. She saw something wrong. Near the orchestra, a waiter was moving against the flow of the crowd. He wasn't carrying a tray. He was moving with a predatory grace, his hand tucked inside his jacket. His eyes weren't on the guests. They were locked on Alistair, who was now standing by a pillar, talking to a grey-haired man. Genevieve looked at the reflection in the terrace glass. She saw the waiter draw a long, thin stiletto. She looked for Alistair. He was distracted, deep in conversation. The music was swelling a loud waltz, masking the sound of the assassin's approach. If she screamed, she exposed herself. If she did nothing, Alistair died. The assassin was closing in. 10 feet. 5 feet. Genevieve made a choice. She stood up, grabbed a heavy silver tray of champagne flutes from a passing table, blindly, seemingly by accident, and hurled it not at the floor, but directly into the path of the assassin. "Oh, help me!" she shrieked, flailing her arms. The tray crashed into the assassin's legs. The man stumbled, the knife slipping from his sleeve and clattering onto the floor. The sound of shattering glass and the knife hitting the marble silenced the orchestra. Genevieve collapsed onto the floor in a heap of velvet and panic, sobbing. "I tripped. I couldn't find my way. Someone help me." Chaos erupted. Guards rushed in. The assassin, now exposed with a weapon at his feet, tried to run but was tackled by 2 Royal Marines. Alistair was at her side in an instant. He knelt down, lifting her from the wreckage of the champagne glasses. "Genevieve, I fell," she sobbed into his chest, hiding her face. "I tried to find you, and I fell." Alistair looked at the assassin being dragged away. He looked at the knife. He looked at the trajectory of the tray Genevieve had thrown. It wasn't a clumsy drop. It was a precise intercept. He looked down at her, his face unreadable. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "You have terrible balance, my dear," he said softly. "But impeccable timing." They left the ball immediately. The carriage ride back to the London townhouse was silent. The air was thick with adrenaline. When they arrived, Alistair didn't take her to her room. He took her to his private study and locked the door. He turned on the gas lamps. The light hissed into existence, illuminating his face. He looked dangerous. "Drop it," he said. "Drop what, Alistair?" she asked, clutching her cane. "The cane, the act, the lie." He walked toward her, backing her against the desk. "You saw him. You saw the knife in the reflection. You threw that tray to save my life." "I tripped," she insisted, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You targeted him," Alistair roared, slamming his hand on the desk beside her hip. "Stop lying to me, Genevieve. I don't care about the deception. I care that you just involved yourself in a war you don't understand." "I saved you," she yelled back, the mask finally slipping. Her eyes snapped to his, focusing sharp and clear. "He was going to kill you. Would you prefer I let him bury that shiv in your spine so I could keep playing the helpless invalid?" Silence. The world seemed to stop. She had looked at him. She had yelled at him. She had admitted it. Alistair stared at her. For the first time he was seeing her. Not the blind girl, not the asset, but the woman who had just saved his life with a silver tray and a scream. The anger in his eyes shifted into something else, something hotter. "You can see," he breathed. "I can see," she defied him chin high. "I have seen everything for 3 years. I saw you move the furniture. I saw you reading my mail. I saw the way you look at me when you think I'm not looking. And how do I look at you?" he asked, his voice rough. Genevieve faltered. Like a puzzle you can't solve." "No," Alistair said, stepping closer, invading her space until their bodies were touching. "I look at you like a man who is starving." He didn't wait for permission. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle romance novel kiss. It was desperate, fueled by 3 years of lies and the adrenaline of a near-death experience. It was a collision. Genevieve dropped her cane. She grabbed the lapels of his coat, pulling him closer. For the first time, she didn't have to hide the fire in her eyes. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Alistair rested his forehead against hers. "You are a dangerous woman, Genevieve Sterling. And you are a dangerous man, Alistair." "Good," he said, pulling back to look at her with grim determination. "Because the man who tried to kill me tonight wasn't a random anarchist. He was sent by the leader of the circle." He walked to his safe and pulled out a pistol. He turned back to her, holding it out handle first. "The game has changed. They know I have a weakness now. They think it's my blind wife." He placed the gun in her hand. It was heavy, cold. "Can you shoot?" he asked. Genevieve gripped the weapon, testing its weight. She looked at him, her eyes clear and fierce. "I can learn." "Good." Alistair grinned a wolfish, terrifying grin. "Because we are going to hunt them down. But first, we have to make sure the world still thinks you are blind. Can you keep up the lie even now? For you?" Genevieve smiled, a sharp, cunning thing. "I can be blind, deaf, and dumb if it helps us win." "Then let's play," Alistair said. The dynamic at Stirling Hall shifted overnight. The silence was gone, replaced by a frenetic partnership. By day, Genevieve played the role of the frail Duchess, stumbling in the gardens and wearing dark glasses. By night, inside the locked study, she was Alistair's analyst. She had a memory for detail that rivaled his own. She pored over the intercepted letters he brought home, spotting patterns he missed. The handwriting on the cargo manifest matches the invitation from Lord Blackwood. She pointed out one evening, tracing the ink with a finger. Alistair leaned over her shoulder, the heat of his chest against her back. Blackwood. He's the head of the Exchequer. If he's funding the circle, then the corruption goes to the very top, Genevieve finished. But the Circle of Crows was not idle. They knew Alistair had survived the ball. They knew the wolf was closing in, and they decided to strike at his home. It happened on a stormy night in November. The wind was howling off the Cornish coast, rattling the window panes like skeletal fingers. Alistair had been called away to the village, a decoy they would realize too late. Genevieve was alone in the house with the servants. She was in her bedroom when she heard it. Not the wind. The sound of glass breaking on the ground floor. Then the wet thud of a body hitting the floorboards. Mrs. Higgins. Genevieve didn't scream. She blew out the candle by her bed, plunging the room into darkness. Darkness was her ally. She knew every creak of this house. The intruders did not. She grabbed the pistol Alistair had given her from beneath her pillow. She moved to the door, listening. Heavy footsteps. 3 men. Maybe 4. "Find the girl," a voice hissed. "Blackwood wants her alive. Use her to make the Duke surrender." They were coming for her. Genevieve slipped into the hallway. She didn't run away from them. She ran toward the chaos. She needed to get to the library. There was a secret passage there that led to the stables. She reached the top of the grand staircase just as the men entered the foyer below. They carried lanterns. "Check the east wing." Genevieve crouched behind the banister. She raised the pistol. Her hand trembled just once, then steadied. "Breathe. Aim. Squeeze." She fired. The shot rang out like a cannon blast. The lantern in the lead man's hand exploded, spraying oil and glass. He screamed as the flames caught his sleeve. "She's armed," one yelled. "I thought she was blind. She's shooting at shadows." "Get her." Genevieve didn't wait. She bolted down the hallway, her feet silent on the runner rugs. She ducked into the library and locked the heavy oak doors. She ran to the bookshelf, pulling the false volume of Dante's Inferno that triggered the mechanism. The shelf clicked, but didn't swing open. It was jammed. "Damn it!" she hissed, yanking at the wood. Crash! An axe bit into the library door. Wood splintered. "Open up, Duchess. We just want to talk." She was trapped. The secret passage was stuck. The door was breaking. She looked around the vast room. She couldn't hide. She checked the pistol. 1 shot left. The door gave way with a deafening crack. 3 men stumbled in their faces, covered in scarves, weapons drawn. Genevieve stood behind Alistair's heavy desk, the gun leveled at the center mass of the largest man. "Stay back," she warned, her voice steel. The leader laughed. "Or what?" "You'll shoot the ceiling, love." "Put it down. You can't see us." He stepped forward, arrogant. He thought she was blind. He thought she was aiming by sound. Genevieve shifted her aim 2 inches to the right, directly at his heart. "I can see the fear in your eyes," she said coldly. The man paused, confusion flickering in his gaze. "What?" I said. Genevieve cocked the hammer. "I can see you." She fired. The bullet struck him in the shoulder. She had aimed for the heart, but the recoil threw her off. Still, the impact spun him around, and he collapsed, howling. The other two men hesitated. The prey had teeth, but they were professionals. They fanned out, moving into the shadows, where they thought she couldn't track them. Genevieve dropped the empty gun and grabbed the letter opener from the desk, a sharp, deadly piece of steel. "Come on, then!" she screamed. One man lunged. She dodged, slashing out, catching his arm. But the third man tackled her from behind. They hit the floor hard. The breath was knocked out of her. He pinned her wrists, his weight crushing. "Got you, you little witch!" he grunted, pulling a rope from his belt. Genevieve struggled, kicking, biting, but he was too strong. Suddenly, the library window exploded inward. A figure swung in from the rain-lashed terrace, shattering the frame. A dark coat, a flash of steel, and a roar of pure fury. Alistair. He didn't look like a duke. He looked like the devil. He landed and didn't stop moving. He was on the man, standing over Genevieve in a heartbeat. He didn't use a weapon. He used his fists, striking with brutal military efficiency. The man crumpled. The wounded leader tried to raise his gun. Alistair spun, drawing a knife from his boot and throwing it. It thudded into the man's leg. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the groans of the intruders and the howling wind. Alistair stood panting, his hair plastered to his forehead by rain blood on his knuckles. He looked wild. He turned to Genevieve, who was pushing herself up from the floor. "I told you," he gasped, rushing to her and checking her for injuries with frantic hands. "I told you to be careful. I held them off," she said, her voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "I shot one." Alistair looked at the carnage. He looked at his wife, disheveled, bruised, but fierce. "You did," he said, pulling her into a crushing embrace. "You did." He pulled back, his face grim. "But this changes everything. They know you can see. You aimed. You fought." "The lie is over," Genevieve said. "Yes?" Alistair nodded. "The lie is over. Now we go to war. Blackwood dies for this." He helped her stand. "Pack your things, Genevieve. We are leaving Stirling Hall. Tonight." "Where are we going?" "To London," Alistair said, his eyes darkening. "To the Queen. We're going to burn Blackwood's world to the ground, and we're going to do it together." As they walked out of the library, leaving the groaning men for the guards to collect, Genevieve didn't use her cane. She walked beside him, stride for stride, her head high. The blind beauty was gone. The Duchess of Deception had arrived. London in the winter of 1885 was a sprawling beast of fog, gaslight, and whispers. Alistair and Genevieve arrived under the cover of darkness, taking up residence not in the main Stirling townhouse, which was surely watched, but in a safe house in Kensington owned by the Crown. The dynamic between them had shifted irrevocably. There were no more counted steps, no more faked stumbles. In the carriage ride to the city, Alistair had briefed her on every detail of the case. Lord Blackwood wasn't just smuggling explosives. He was planning a coup. He intended to blow up the House of Lords during the opening of Parliament, creating a power vacuum he would fill. "He needs a scapegoat," Alistair explained, pacing the small, dusty parlour of the safe house. "He intends to frame the Irish separatists. But to do that, he needs the detonators that were intercepted at the docks last week. He thinks I have them." "Do you?" Genevieve asked, cleaning the soot from her travel cloak. "Yes, and he will trade anything to get them back, even his own soul." "He won't trade his soul," Genevieve said darkly. "He'll trade my father." Alistair stopped pacing. "What makes you say that? Because Baron Sinclair is a coward, and cowards are the easiest pawns to play." Genevieve was right. 2 days later, a message arrived. It wasn't sent to Alistair. It was sent to Lady Genevieve, delivered by a street urchin. It was a single playing card, the King of Diamonds, and on the back, a location and time, the Royal Opera House. Midnight. Come alone, or the Baron hangs. "It's a trap," Alistair said, crushing the card in his fist. "Of course it's a trap," Genevieve replied, taking the card from him and smoothing it out. She looked at him, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "But it's also an invitation. You are not going alone. I have to. If he sees you, he kills my father. If he sees me, the blind, helpless girl, he gets overconfident." Alistair looked at her. He hated it. He wanted to lock her in a vault until the world was safe. But he knew she was right. Blackwood didn't know that Genevieve had been the one to shoot his man in Cornwall. The survivors of that night had likely lied to save their own skins, claiming it was the Duke who fought them off. To Blackwood, Genevieve was still just leverage. "We need a plan," Alistair said. "A play. If we do this, we do it on our terms." "I have an idea," Genevieve said, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips. "For 3 years I played the victim. Tomorrow night at the opera, I want to play the villain." The plan was audacious. It relied on precise timing, the architecture of the opera house, and the arrogance of Lord Blackwood. The night of the exchange, the opera house was officially closed, dark and cavernous. But the side door was unlocked. Genevieve walked in. She carried her cane, tapping it loudly against the floorboards. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed in the empty auditorium. She wore a heavy cloak, her hood up. "Father," she called out, her voice trembling just the right amount. "Up here, my dear." The voice came from the royal box, high above the stage. Genevieve looked up, not directly, but keeping her head tilted down, feigning blindness. She sensed movement in the shadows, men with rifles. "Come up," Blackwood's voice sneered, "and bring the package your husband stole." She climbed the grand staircase, her cane finding every step. She clutched a leather satchel to her chest. Inside were the detonators, or rather, dummy canisters, filled with sand. When she entered the royal box, the smell of cigar smoke choked her. Lord Blackwood sat on a velvet chair, a pistol resting on his knee. Beside him, tied to a chair and looking thoroughly beaten, was Baron Sinclair. "Genevieve." Her father wept. "He's going to kill me. Give him what he wants." "Quiet, old fool," Blackwood snapped. He looked at Genevieve. "You are a loyal daughter, more than he deserves. Put the bag on the floor and kick it to me." Genevieve stood in the doorway. She didn't move. "I said, give it to me." "No," she said. The silence that followed was heavy. Blackwood laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "No. You are in no position to bargain, my dear. You are blind, unarmed, and alone." "I am not alone," she said softly. "Oh, is the Duke hiding in the curtains?" Blackwood mocked, looking around. "No," Genevieve said. She reached up and pulled down her hood. She opened her eyes wide, staring directly at Blackwood. The milky, unfocused gaze was gone. Her eyes were piercing clear and filled with cold fury. "I am not alone because I have my sight." Blackwood froze. The change in her demeanor was terrifying. The fragile girl was gone. "I see the man behind the curtain to your left," she stated calmly. "I see the rifle barrel protruding from the box opposite us, and I see that your safety catch is still on Lord Blackwood." Blackwood looked down at his gun in panic. "Now!" Genevieve screamed. The lights of the opera house suddenly blazed to life, not the gas lamps, but a blinding magnesium flare dropped from the catwalks above. Alistair had been waiting in the rafters. Confusion erupted. The sudden light blinded the gunmen who had been adjusting their eyes to the dark. Glass shattered as Alistair swung down on a rope, crashing into the royal box like a vengeful god. He kicked the gun from Blackwood's hand before the man could blink. "Treason," Alistair growled, pinning Blackwood to the wall by his throat. "Conspiracy to commit murder. And annoying my wife. That is 3 strikes, Blackwood." The gunmen across the auditorium opened fire, but they were shooting blind into the box. Genevieve dove not for cover, but toward her father. She used the letter opener she had concealed in her sleeve to slice his ropes. "Get down," she ordered him. "You can see." Silas Sinclair gasped, staring at her as bullets chewed up the velvet upholstery. "You lied to me for 3 years. I did what I had to do to survive you," she yelled back. Alistair drew his own weapon, firing back at the assassins across the theatre. "We need to move. The police are on their way, but we have to hold them off for 5 minutes. The stage," Genevieve pointed. "There's a trap door for the actors." They scrambled out of the box, dragging the Baron. They ran for the stage, dodging gunfire. Blackwood, recovering his senses, grabbed a discarded rifle and aimed at their retreating backs. He aimed at Alistair. Genevieve saw it. She didn't think. She spun around, grabbing a prop sword from a rack in the wings. It was dull, but it was heavy iron. She hurled it. It wasn't a graceful throw, but it was desperate. The hilt struck Blackwood in the face just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, shattering a prop mirror. Blackwood howled in pain, clutching his broken nose. They reached the trapdoor. Alistair kicked it open. "Ladies first." He grinned, sweat and soot streaking his face. Genevieve jumped into the darkness below, followed by her father, and finally Alistair. They landed on a pile of mattresses in the understage storage. Above them, the doors of the opera house burst open. "Scotland Yard, drop your weapons." The police had arrived. The trap was sprung. The trial of Lord Blackwood was the scandal of the century. The evidence Alistair provided, the dossier, the detonators, and the testimony of several captured crows, was damning. But the star witness was not the Duke. It was the Duchess. Genevieve took the stand not as the blind victim, but as the woman who had infiltrated the conspiracy. She spoke clearly, her eyes scanning the jury, making contact with every man there. She recounted the years of silence, the secrets she had heard, when men thought she was broken furniture. She listed names, dates and bribes she had witnessed Blackwood discuss in her presence at various balls, assuming she was deaf to the world as well as blind. "They thought I was nothing," she told the court, "and because I was nothing to them, I became everything they feared, a witness." Blackwood was sentenced to hang for high treason. But there was one loose end. Baron Silas Sinclair. After the trial, Genevieve met her father in the hallway of the Old Bailey. He looked smaller than she remembered, shrunken by fear and the loss of his gambling patron. "Genevieve," he started, a wheedling tone entering his voice. "My clever girl, we could be a team again, with your wits and my connections." Genevieve looked at him. She felt nothing. The fear was gone. The hate had burned itself out. "I am not your girl, Silas," she said coolly. "I am the Duchess of Westcliff. and you are leaving England." "Leaving," he sputtered. "But Alistair has purchased a ticket for you, a steamer to America. You leave tomorrow. You will have a small allowance, enough to live, but not enough to gamble. If you ever return, the allowance stops, and I will testify about your involvement in Blackwood's smuggling ring. I saved you from the noose, father. Do not test me." Silas stared at her. He looked for the frightened blind girl he had bullied. He saw only a queen. He took the ticket and walked away without a word. Genevieve walked out of the courthouse and into the winter sunlight. The glare was bright, hurting her eyes, but she didn't look away. Alistair was waiting for her by the carriage. He was leaning against the door, arms crossed, watching her. "Is it done?" he asked. "It is done," she said. He opened the door for her. "Home. Home," she agreed. But as the carriage rattled through the streets of London, a comfortable silence settled between them. Genevieve looked at Alistair. He was reading a newspaper, or pretending to. "You know," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye, "the doctor said my sight might be temperamental. I might need help navigating the stairs at Stirling Hall occasionally." Alistair lowered the paper. A slow, devastating smile spread across his face. "Is that so?" "Yes. And I might need someone to read to me by the fire. My eyes get tired." "I see," Alistair said, moving to the seat beside her. He took her hand, kissing the knuckles. "Well, as it happens, I am looking for a new position. Spy work is terribly exhausting. I was thinking of becoming a full-time guide for a very difficult, very beautiful woman." "She sounds like trouble," Genevieve whispered, leaning in. "The best kind," Alistair murmured before closing the distance between them. The kiss was real. No acting, no audience. Just two people who had seen the darkest parts of each other and chosen to stay. Genevieve Sinclair had pretended to be blind for 3 years to save her life. But in the end, it was the Duke of Westcliff who had taught her how to truly see. And so the legend of the blind Duchess faded, replaced by the reality of Genevieve Sterling, a woman who brought down a government conspiracy with nothing but her wits and a cane she didn't need. They say Alistair and Genevieve retired to Cornwall, away from the prying eyes of London society. Some rumors claim she eventually started a school for the blind, teaching them not just to read, but to observe things, seeing people often missed. Others say she and Alistair continued their work for the Crown, in secret, a husband and wife team that no one ever saw coming. But the most reliable records tell us simply this: they were happy. In a world of lies, they had found the one thing that was undeniably real. What a journey, from a trapped victim to a mastermind spy. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes deception and historical romance, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. What would you have done in Genevieve's shoes? Would you have revealed your secret sooner or played the long game like she did? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories of historical intrigue, betrayal and romance, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.